I was very much brought up around it and really aware of the power of a beautiful garment and how it really transforms somebody's mood, somebody's sway, just really have a positive way of turning them into this really happy being.
That's fashion designer and entrepreneur Sophia Demirtas. I'm Kara Duffy, and this is the Powerful Ladies Podcast. Welcome to the Powerful Ladies Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's begin by telling everyone your name, where you are in the world, and what it is that you're up to.
My name is Sophia Demirtas. I am currently in Turkey. And even though I live between here and New York, I spent most of my time here because this is where production is for our beautiful garments. So that really keeps me more so on this side of the world. Mm-hmm. And I guess I have been extremely busy, which I feel extremely fortunate to say such at this very moment because, there seems to be quite a lot going on. And I know that having so many designer friends, things are somewhat different for them. So I feel very fortunate to say that I am very busy with collaborations and I'm currently trying to wrap up my resort collection, which is going out early June during Market Week in New York. So there's quite a lot going on I'm thankful for.
Well, so if we go back, would 8-year-old you imagine that this is your life and this is what you're up to?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think as a child, I never really fully envisioned myself being in fashion in any capacity. Even though I always had an admiration for fashion because I grew up around women who were very self-aware. My aunts, they had their dresses tailored. My uniforms actually were tailored every year, every season for the school year. So I was very much brought up around it and really aware of the power of a beautiful garment and how it really transforms somebody's mood, somebody's sway, somebody's, just really have a positive way of turning them into this really happy being. But I never really imagined myself, at that age or even a little older, having this as my career path. My path really started very differently. Even though my career is not necessarily what I envisioned at that age, I think when I became a teenager, that's when it became clear to me that I wanted to do something that would ultimately be of positive to humanity. And so I delved into social work. And in some capacity, I think I was set to kind of change the world, starting with New York City homelessness situation. I really felt that was my calling, and especially having been thrust into the foster care system myself at a very young age. So that was really my mission. I felt like it was in life. And unfortunately, once I kind of graduated and got my first directorial position in a homeless shelter, I really quickly understood that there was a lot more to this than just people being in need and you being put in a position to help and change their lives.
I live in Southern California, and we have one of the, biggest crises for homelessness.
Yes, and I'm aware, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. And I think the homelessness that people see is so different than the realities. Like the stats, I from my understanding, that 75% are women and children, but you don't see them in the tent cities because they're in cars or, they're being safer or more hidden about it because they have to protect themselves. So floating on friends' couches, sleeping in their cars, there's a much more secretive, protective approach. And then there's veterans, and then there's the homelessness that gets a lot of visibility, which is, and it's so frustrating when, as compassionate humans, you know that this is not how it should be, and there
Mhm.
doesn't seem to be solutions for it. So you having worked in that space and having, I believe, a master's degree in social work, what,
Yeah, I have a
like,
master's degree in public affairs and
okay.
administration, but I work as a social worker
Mm-hmm.
from maybe informally as a volunteer from the time that I was about 16, because my
Mm-hmm.
foster care mom, who was like the very best person that I could have met in that
Okay.
situation, because she literally was a parent.
Mm-hmm.
She was a social worker working for children's services.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really kind of like brought into that environment because after school, like I think I was one of the youngest girls. Well, not I think, other than the girls who had children, I was the youngest one
Mm-hmm.
within that home. She didn't have a group home, but she had a home big enough in Bedford-Stuyvesant that housed all of us, and some of us had to share rooms, but we were still very comfortable. Given
Mm-hmm.
the stories that we've heard. But I was really someone that was somewhat clingy to her, and
Mm-hmm.
she also had two biological daughters who were living away from her in Georgia. So I pretty much was, spending every chance, every time that I could get with her. So after school, I would go to that office on
Mm-hmm.
Bedford in Brooklyn and kind of like stay there to do my homework. So of course, like I kind of informally became her assistant if she
Okay.
needed to go get something from the printer or whatever. So in some aspect, I kind of understood the dynamic of
Mm-hmm.
that facility. And it was a no-brainer that I wanted to remain a part of that field.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school and graduated college pretty early with my bachelor's degree before I got my master's in like a concentrated program.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my first job very early. I think maybe I was around 2021. Like before I left foster care, I was already like a social
Mm-hmm.
worker. So I worked, and homelessness is really where my heart was pulled
Mm-hmm.
because, you have a lot of people in the streets who are self medicating. And even when I was kind of like looking for my way into this field, I went and got myself certificates. Like I have to go and look for those things because moving into Turkey, I'm sure everything is kind of like piled up somewhere. I have to go through to find my certificates and everything. But I got like dental assistant certificates. I got phlebotomy, how to draw
Mm-hmm.
the blood, like all types of things. And my very first job was working directly with people who were HIV positive. That was, um, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere near the 14th Street area. Like I have to
Mm-hmm.
go in and try to find um, the was I think it was Greenwich House, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. Like they had a lot of methadone clinics throughout. And even before I became a social worker, I had like my certificate to kind of like draw blood. So you had all these HIV people who were kind of like who were also self-medicating, who had to go in to have their blood drawn so they could be given like methadones and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So I was really aware of the
Mm-hmm.
issue of homelessness being tied to like heavy drug use. And that's why I went and I got my master's degree because I really felt I needed to be in a position to really go in and make a difference. And I guess being so young and so naive, I didn't really understand the pyramid that's
Mm-hmm.
really into that system, because at the end of the day, when you hear non for profit, you're thinking, that's really what it is. That's really all there is to it. But in reality, um, it's a business, and I think that's what was really heartbroken for me to realize. And once I realized it, and unfortunately, even the people that were kind of like working with me or I was their boss, they found every reason to not make things easy for me. I was too young, I was too slim, I was too sassy, I was too knowledgeable. Like
Yeah.
they were too old, old enough to be my mom. It's kind of how could you be
Mm-hmm.
my boss? Like you're just too young to this, to that, to the other, and not really keeping the focus on the people that we all
Mm-hmm.
vowed to help. And it just really became overwhelming. And again, being young and somewhat impatient, I kind of said, okay, well, if this is what this is entailed, and not necessarily because the people that I was working with that made things really difficult, it was more so of even the people, like that were my boss in the highest position.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the psychiatrists I felt who were not even looking at the people who were seated in front of him. He was just a matter of prescribing the next drug that was coming out, and you had more of these pharmaceutical reps walking into these places, introducing the next drug and the next drug. So there was just so much happening that I was just
Yeah.
it didn't sit with me because it
Mm-hmm.
was a very different um, sort of environment from where mommy used to work, Miss Jackson was, and like with the whole children's services versus you're now kind of like being at the top, and then you're working with the psychiatrist who doesn't even want to hear anything you have to say because he's the psych director, and then he's just giving whatever meds, and then as you kind of like start to connect the dots, you really understand how the pharmaceutical company is kind of like it's a business. I
Yeah.
don't know which other way to say it. It's a business.
Mm-hmm.
And that realization, on top of everyone that was just kind of like questioning and undermining everything because I was too young to have this position, to be in that position, um, I just said, you know what, perhaps I need to just pull back and really reevaluate to see if I
Mm-hmm.
want to stay in this sector or um, seek other things. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately for me, I was just starting to date my husband. And he was like, well, you modeled in high school, you have such a great sense of style. Why don't you really just tap into fashion and do it in a, I guess kind of like serious way? So being someone who's extremely driven, who I guess naturally, innately have some form of business acronym, I didn't leave my career to get into this as a hobby. I just,
Mm-hmm.
within a couple of weeks, I had a business on
Yeah.
eBay. And it just kind of like it was not a smooth sailing, but it was kind of like a sailing from there on.
Which is incredible because so often you build it and people don't come, right? Like
Yeah.
when I'm not doing Powerful Ladies, I'm a business coach and I work with tons of small businesses. And, there's this illusion, one person the other day I was talking to goes, well, I see these things online that if I just build an Amazon business, I can make money while I sleep. I'm like, that's the biggest lie that's out there. There's
Yeah.
no job where if you're making money while you
Nothing.
sleep, that means you've been in business for at least 10 years. You spent
Yeah.
probably $100,000 just on ads. Like
Hmm.
there's all these things. I'm like, no, whatever you're going to choose is going to be hard work. So like, let's at least make the hard work fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, especially now, I started online business in 2005 when,
Mm-hmm.
just like the internet was becoming a thing, shopping online was becoming a thing. So you didn't have all these competitors, you didn't have all these
Mm-hmm.
websites. And eBay really was the hub. That was
Yeah.
where everybody felt safe to take the chance to buy something from a stranger, knowing that if it wasn't delivered or whatever, there was some form of protection. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of room to kind of like to learn to grow. And now, fast forward 20 years, things are just a lot more complex. And I think, like even for me, who went through that journey, I kind of feel it was really somewhat, even though it was a business that was kind of like being formed, it was really more of a schooling. Um, at the time, I didn't fully understand, but I feel like it was really a schooling that was happening for me. And in some way, I'm extremely thankful because, the creativity, it's there, it's in all of us. And once you start tapping into it, it could only
Mm-hmm.
grow and multiply. But having business acronym is something that's entirely different. And I think really that's the base that eBay did for me. And that's why I'm always proud to tell people like this was my
Yeah.
beginning because it
Mm-hmm.
really just kind of like set the stage. And for me, who went into this um, like full throttle as a seller, like buying hundreds of clothes to kind of like to sell from different brands, from um, like kind of like scavenging through the fashion district in New York to find whatever sales or whatever deals that were not necessarily being populated to the general public, to really find these gems. That just really made me savvy in a different way. In addition to really understanding what it takes to kind of like have a supply chain and understanding that, and how that,
Mm-hmm.
could either make or break you, when to take risk into certain things. And I think more importantly for me, it was a school in a sense that it really taught me about the quality of garments, quality of fabrics, craftsmanship, not necessarily to focus more on a label, um, but to really understand like the work that people are putting a lot of love, a lot of effort, a lot of energy in. So it really set the bar for me to convey that into my own brand.
Mm-hmm.
Because aside from that early introductory in Haiti, having my aunts, seeing my aunt's garment being made, or having my uniforms being made, and understanding the level of care that goes into a tailor's work, and to now see that being represented in some other brands, whether it's like a Prada or a Gucci, or like a fashion designer that's up and coming, that's really just putting her heart and soul into what she creates. So that
Mm-hmm.
really set up the stage for me to understand, like, if I'm going to get into this, I want that feeling that I had interacting with all of these different brands at that early stage. I wanted to be reflective within my own work.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great.
Well, in addition to the high level of like quality and detail that you see in your brand, I
Mm-hmm.
also really saw the social worker empathy in how you talk about your business, and, the
Thank you.
atelier and the teams. And something that really struck with me was that you moved production from Ukraine to Turkey. Was that
Yes.
because of the war? And how devastating, if it was, how devastating was it to have to make that move?
Well, fortunately for me, it wasn't. And I say fortunately because I think, if the war was the reason that pushed me to make that
Hmm.
transition, it would have been really difficult for me.
Yeah.
It really emotional, because I worked with my team in Ukraine for many, many years, like many, many years, nearly a decade. So there was really that bond, that schooling, that nurturing that really was established there. Because, even though I had eBay for X amount of years, it was more of a selling and buying. So my
Yep.
team in Ukraine was really the crafts team that nurtured me into understanding what it really means to work with a group of people, and particularly with a group of women. So there was a lot of kind of deepened connection that happened there. And fortunately, the war was not the cause that made me say, you know what, I need to kind of like move into Turkey. It was because of the pandemic. I left Ukraine uh, pretty much on the last flight that was
Mhm.
being permitted to exit the country. And I went into a panic attack because I don't know if you remember when this whole explosion happened in Beirut. I
Yes.
think their port was kind of like blown for whatever sort of
Hmm.
chemical thing that they said was happening there. And, here we are in the pandemic. By that time, I had already been in Ukraine for more than a month. My children are not with me. My husband is not with me.
Hmm.
And this explosion happened, and there's this pandemic. Every day you're hearing a country saying this or that. So it was just kind of, I literally experienced a panic attack for the very first time in my life. And I had to hug myself, into a
Hmm.
pillow, like to give myself breathing exercises
Yeah.
to fall asleep. Um, because I was just like, oh my God, am I just going to exit this planet this way without having my loved ones close to me? And I think the reality of really knowing so many people ended up leaving the world in that way, sadly, because of the pandemic. It's not just something I'm imagining. There's a
Yep.
strong possibility that may be the
Hmm.
case. And that really freaked me out. Um, so I kind of like woke up from that, and I called my husband. I said, you know what? Like, I think whatever it is that I'm going to be doing onwards, I need it to be like within reaching distance from you and my children. Like, I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to take the risk of being stuck in another country, overlooking production, and then this world is coming to an end, and I cannot hug you and my kids if that's the
Mm-hmm.
last thing that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I came here a year prior before the war happened, and I kind of went through the whole process, the whole transitioning of developing here in Turkey, but also
Mm-hmm.
giving the team enough time to find work, because work is not always very easy to find in Ukraine. So give them time to find work, to kind of like transition into doing their own thing, because they're very
Mm-hmm.
skilled. So some of them went into doing like tailoring businesses and doing other things or finding other jobs. So for the time that we established in Turkey, I literally had, um, the majority of our orders continued to be produced in Ukraine for that
Mm-hmm.
year transition.
Yep.
And we kind of like had the team in Turkey kind of in training and dealing more with the wholesale orders. And then Ukraine continued to handle mainly our retail orders, which
Mm-hmm.
was like daily. We have retail sales on the
Yep.
regular. So when the war happened, I tried to convince pretty much everybody that was working for me, like, hey, I know what's happening. You're in a very unfortunately terrible situation. I'm here. I'm established here. And especially, I think Turkey opened their doors to kind of like have people come in, as refuge, if that's the word, as refugees. So I told them, come here. You have a space
Mm-hmm.
guarantee, you have opportunity and a job guaranteed. And 100% all of them told me no. They would not leave their country. They would stay here and fight. Some of their husbands went into fight. Some of their sons went into fight. And they stayed there, stitching military equipment and doing whatever it is that they could at the time to support the war. So, unfortunately, none of them wanted to make the transition, or I guess fortunately, because you have to
Mm-hmm.
respect where they stood on that. And yeah, so it's been nearly about 4.5 years since
Mm-hmm.
we've been in Turkey. I think, yeah, 4 years and a few months
I,
since we've transitioned in Turkey.
before everything I'm doing now, I worked in footwear and apparel fashion for
Mm-hmm.
20 years. And in March, I just launched a new company that's doing luxury garment bags. Um,
Oh, how beautiful.
it's really fun, and it's nice to be making a product again, because for a long time I haven't been. But I'm very familiar with having to change sourcing and dual sourcing and set everything up. And, there's so many tasks that we have in a fashion business that need attention every day. Like the calendar doesn't stop, the to-do list doesn't stop. But
Mm-mm.
transitioning like your production is such a huge project that has
Yeah,
to be done right. And I love that you had the luxury, whether it felt that way at the time or not, of having that transition with the two locations. Because sometimes, like what's happening now for some companies, like your country of origins just no longer available,
yeah.
and you're
Mm-hmm.
scrambling to find other things. So especially again when the craftsmanship is so important and the
Mm-hmm.
relationship from maker to consumer is so important. um I'm sympathizing with you and all the work it took to set Turkey up and to offboard Ukraine. And it's a lot. And then when you take your sourcing and production hat off, you get to be CEO and be marketing and be
Yeah.
designer. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a really interesting kind of dance, I think, that entrepreneurs like yourself have to do to have such a successful company as you do. And I don't think that people see all of it.
Yeah.
Um, there's such a perception of what it's like to be a fashion designer. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, that is the top 5% of all of it.
Yeah. And then the other part is just really in the nitty and
Mhm.
gritty and the stress and the chaos. But I
Yeah.
feel very fortunate that my approach is really human centered. So
Mm-hmm.
in many aspects, it has made things a lot easier for me. And I think, in my business, in my line of production, our currency, the strongest, or I guess the invaluable currency that we have
Mm-hmm.
is really in our team. And I make that known to them, and I make that known to everyone who is supporting the brand, because obviously we work in a very different way, in a very delicate way, not just in our approach in what we do. But for me personally, I want to feel a sense of security in our workspace, in our environment, because
Mm-hmm.
we spend the majority of our time together, more than I'm fortunate to have my husband as my business partner. So to some aspect, my family is kind of what ingrained in the business. But my employees, they spend the majority of the time with, within ourselves more than they do
Mm-hmm.
with their family. So it was very important for me to help them understand, the importance of having a space to come to work where you're not feeling panicky because somebody's being catty towards you or someone is being
Mm-hmm.
sort of like negative. So of course it wasn't very easy to establish in Turkey. And the difference between here and Ukraine is in Ukraine they are really, I consider them extremely skilled artisans,
Mm-hmm.
in the aspect that they go to school to fully learn the construction of a garment. Like whomever is just kind of like into fashion, they go deep within.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, you do have some youngsters and some other people in Turkey that kind of like go through that whole fashion process as well. And then you have in Ukraine where, even if someone is kind of like going to school to learn to become a seamstress, they just really are curious about every aspect of it. And what was kind of a rude awakening for me in Turkey, is how different things kind of like are approached here. And I guess for the most part, it's heavily due to the fact that they are a production sort of like
Mm-hmm.
country. So, everything is kind of like mass, everything is numbers,
Mm-hmm.
everything is speed. So here I am coming with, something that's very different. Not to say unique, but very different in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that it's really quality focused. It's
Yeah.
really, I mean, of course, sometimes we have to rush orders, but the approach is very different in the sense that we don't kind of like mass print a pattern and mass
Mm-hmm.
produce a quantity, and then I have to stress about selling that specific, you
Yeah.
know, quantity of garment that's all unique. I mean, that's all the same and not necessarily unique. So we do a lot of customization. So
Mm-hmm.
that goes from a customer wanting a different fabric with a different embroidery to a different length to a different sizing, a smaller bust, a larger bust, a smaller hip, larger waist. So you name it. So when you have that offering to your customer, it's very important that the people who are kind of receiving that and putting that together, that they are
Mm-hmm.
in a happy space. And that in turn channels down to me because obviously, if I need to be away for a day or two, I don't need to come back to chaos.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of where it took a lot of filtering. Because of course you
Mm-hmm.
have some people who just prefer to sit in a factory in a band where they have like 1,000 people just
Mm-hmm.
kind of like attaching part by part until they get to them to just kind of like attach a sleeve or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone working for me, even if they came from that system. So first of all, like I go through this training process where I'm telling them like, you need to slow your hands down. Because we're making things for women. So we have to, first of all, happily want to make these. So there's like a presence that is
Mm-hmm.
required from you. You're not just kind of like running something through a machine. And in addition to that, there is um, the ability that I want you to entrust in yourself to know you're not here to just attach a piece of a part of a garment. If needed be, you have to be able to make a full garment. And that for now is benefiting, our workspace, our work environment. But ultimately it's you that benefits, because if whatever was to happen here within our facility, then you could easily go and set yourself up to be a seamstress. So we have people that comes in that don't know how to do the buttons, they don't know how to do the zippers, they don't know how to, like make the little intricate details. So they all go through that very training. Well, I guess everybody on my team now are veteran. We don't necessarily have anybody new. They've all been working for me for at least more than 6 months to like 4 years. But every single person that works for me can teach anything that I design. And I'm very proud of that because, as I said to them, I do have quite a lot of young women working for me to, like our eldest employee is in his 70s. He doesn't want to slow down. And he works on the team that produces the online orders. So I split my team into two, similarly to how I kind of like transition into Turkey. It's consistent, where in Ukraine, before I kind of like completely closed there, I had them making just the online orders, and then they were kind of like doing the wholesale here. So I do the same thing here. I have a team that focuses on making primarily the wholesale garments, and then I have another team that makes just the individual online orders. But so if the workflow needs to kind of like be reshuffled or things, I can just gather anybody from my team and they could just stitch me whatever it is that's needed in totality. So, I think in some way the ones who have kind of like made it through with us up till now, they understand that this is something very different, it's something very unique. And they have ingrained and became a part of our core team, and we work as an extended family, as I like to say. Like, so it's a very different system than they're used to. And I'm happy that we have all adapted. I have learned tremendously from them because when you have people who have been in this industry for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, you cannot really come and think you're the one who has something to show, because it goes both ways. So I have learned quite a lot from my team, which I'm extremely appreciative for. And, one of them, the biggest thing being my Turkish is so much better because of them. So I tell her, I give them credit. I used to credit my mother-in-law, but now it's like, yeah, it's my team. They literally, like, however my Turkish is, like, I could confidently speak because of them. So they have been my teachers in many aspects. And I am proud too that I have, for the most part, taught them or showed them that, they are valuable. Their skill is not something that's just minuscule. They are valuable, and they are really a part of our story. And if for whatever reason they were to go elsewhere, at least, they would have that sense of value and worth to demand, in accordance to what they've acquired from us. So I'm very proud of that.
Well, and I don't think we've said the brand name yet. So your company is called?
It's called Fanm Mon. And I know, it's a little bit of a tongue twister because people say Fanm Mon, they say it differently. I guess it comes with the territory when you have a name that's just very culturally unique. To anybody Haitian, like a Haitian, like someone who's Haitian in Haiti, they understand it specifically what it means. They pronounce it with ease, but with other people, it's a little different. So it's Fanm Mon.
Fanm Mon. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, and there you are. Very good.
And it means what, women of the mountain? Is that?
Yeah, it's like it's a mountain women. I guess that's kind of like the simplest way to put it. But I name the brand. Well, I named myself that when I opened my FB account because I don't know if you're aware, I'm really into like herbal things and nature and elixirs and that type of thing. And a lot of them I make myself, which I learned from my grandmother, from the herbal kind of like herb
Mm-hmm.
sellers that used to come and bring her things. So as she was teaching my grandmother concoctions, I'm learning from her. And as my grandmother kind of like revamped whatever
Mm-hmm.
knowledge they passed down to her, I was kind of like learning it in that sense. And Fanm Mon, which are kind of like these women who either hawk fruits or vegetables, or they're the ones who are like working in the farms. They're the ones who are
Mm-hmm.
like the midwives or the doctors of their local community. I've always had an immense amount of respect for them, because I really feel like they are the backbone of Haiti. They work extremely hard to put their children to the highest level of education. They're kind of like the caretaker, the nurturer of
Mm-hmm.
our nation till this day. And unfortunately, in Haiti, it's like being called a Fanm Mon is not necessarily um, appreciated or looked easy upon because they didn't have like a regular classroom education.
Mm-hmm.
Their education really stems from nature, their connection to nature, and a lot of generational knowledge that's passed down to them from their great great grandmother, like to them. So I always felt a sense of connection, and I think that has a lot to do with even my own grandmother's love and appreciation and understanding for their knowledge. So when I opened my Facebook account, like it's so funny that almost every Haitian woman is calling themselves, um, like bad, like sexy this, sexy that, like from sexy, from mauve, from all of these things. And here I'm like from mud. And it literally put my friends and even some strangers in a frenzy. Like, you don't look like a Fanm Mon. Why are you calling yourself that? I'm like, well, innately, it's really their knowledge that I tapped into that feels very familiar to me. So therefore, I am one of them.
Well, and I think you, like many of the other women who have been on this podcast and who I think you and I have in our circles most likely, like I feel so lucky that I'm living at a time when like modern and ancient wisdom is allowed to coexist in a way that it hasn't been before.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, of course, this goes into a whole conversation about patriarchy, but because so often it was the Fanm Mon, it was women carrying these things through. So it was
Mm-hmm.
often disregarded as like a bunch of hoo-ha. It's like
Yeah.
it's woo-woo, it's not
Or they
real.
call them witches and
Yes.
all of these things. And it's another thing is I've traveled to a lot of countries, and it's so uncanny the similarity.
Yeah.
Like if you go to Morocco, they call them the Berbers. If you go, like in Turkey, they call them like village women. Like
Mhm.
or they call them gypsies.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. Like the gypsies here, the interpretation of being called a gypsy in Turkey is very different than kind of
Mhm.
like that elevated, whatever
Mhm.
gypsy we understand to be in the States. But again, as I traveled in so many different countries and cultures,
Mhm.
you really realize it's these Fanm Mon, regardless of what it is that
Mhm.
specific culture referred to them as. It's these women who are really like the ring bearers. They carry the
Yeah.
knowledge, the traditions, the healing entities.
Mhm.
Um, the connection to nature. And I think it's very important for us to continue to embrace them within our culture.
Mhm.
Especially now, I think as people think of technology, they're just thinking of advancement into that direction. And to some aspect, maybe reneging that much, that necessity to continue to seek
Mhm.
knowledge in that sense. And even though I have to say, I feel kind of hopeful. Well, not kind of. I feel very hopeful that I'm seeing there seems to be a movement globally, particularly from this younger generation who's really seeking knowledge, who's really trying
Mhm.
to understand about herbs. And perhaps I'm sensing that, I'm seeing that because if you go on my Instagram, it kind of has a bit of fashion, but it's
Yeah.
mainly about, the natural stuff, the
Mhm.
natural remedies. And
Mhm.
these are things that I'm trying to teach my boys. And
Mhm.
hopefully, they're gonna cling on to it enough to pass it down to their kids and their kids. and they would build from that and add on to that. So I'm very hopeful that the scare that was kind of like attached to a lot of the traditional ways or
Mhm.
knowledge or understanding, it's really being dismantled and looked upon with a new gaze.
Yeah, it's removing the patriarchy component, it's removing the colonization component. Like there's so many
Mm-hmm.
things that are getting pulled back to give all of this wisdom and traditions breathing room. Even I think it's also really inspiring to see how many younger people are learning languages that people thought were going to be extinct. And
Yes.
like this is I think where technology is helpful, like a Duolingo that's adding new languages all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I heard on NPR the other day that there's more people learning Yiddish right now than have spoken it in the past like 100 years.
Oh, wow.
And you're like, what? Like,
What?
how did
Yeah.
that become trendy?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see what's happened. And I agree with you. You see it showing up everywhere in
It's showing. It's showing.
mhm,
And I think, our generation, if you're kind of, again, it depends where you're leaning on social media, they
mhm.
almost kind of want to make us think that the youth is just lost. They're just,
Yeah.
they're just kind of like all over the place. They don't know what
Mhm.
they want and they're all depressed. And I'm like, no, like like when it comes to fighting for justice, it's the youth that I see that kind of like
Mhm.
burst through the door before anybody else, and that's in
Yeah.
any kind of like country. If you're looking at any sort of march that's happening around the world, it's kind of like it's them. And I
Mhm.
guess to some aspect, it has always been that way. And maybe because I'm kind of like an old lady now, you almost want to think this generation is this way and then you're that way.
Mhm.
And then, they do something that really resonates and you're like, oh my gosh, like we are not a lost cause. Like there's
Mhm.
so much hope for us. So much hope for humanity. And
Mhm.
I think the ability to connect to nature and to appreciate nature, to want to protect nature, it really it shows all of that. Or really
Mhm.
to appreciate cultures and
Yeah.
dismantle a lot of the stories,
Mhm.
his stories that we've been told, to really question things, and it's really the youth that's kind of
Mhm.
doing that. It's them that wants to learn not just how to speak a language or a new language or an extinct language, but to really go deeper, to maybe travel to the place that that language is being spoken, to really dig deeper and understand that culture and eat that food and interact in a way that would really make them feel a part of and not gaze from just behind, the screen of their phones. So I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful that we are going to continue to nurture and heal each other.
Mhm.
I'm very hopeful.
Well, similar to you, I've moved abroad, I've traveled a lot. I think the younger generations have become they were just born into a global community much more
Mm-hmm.
than perhaps even we were. And I think people are realizing that what makes travel and makes the diversity of what we have on this planet so rich and interesting is preserving all those things. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's the monoculture that can sometimes happen through being globally connected
Mm-hmm.
is it's boring. Like it's
It's
not
boring. It's boring. And,
yeah.
I just came from St. Lucia literally Wednesday, and one thing that you hear a lot, and it's not just like in St. Lucia or the Caribbean per se, as you travel, everyone is kind of like hoping to have like development. Like I was in Sri Lanka in February and it's the same thing. Everyone just kind of like they wants to see these developments and things like that. And I'm always kind of like the party pooper who's telling everyone, well, then, what's going to keep that enrichment present?
Mhm.
Because if I come here and I'm seeing the same buildings that I would see if I'm in New York City or if I go to Shanghai or, like what
Yeah.
makes this place what it is now, what preserves your culture, what preserves your heritage. And then everyone is like, oh, but it could be this, because, like no one wants to really think
Mm-hmm.
how um, modernization, it comes with a cost, So, and that's not to say that we should not be moving forward. We should not grow and evolve and modernize things. But I think it's very important to kind of have that consciousness that
Mm-hmm.
attached to, it comes with its own form of destruction. And when I see how involved, a lot of the youths are, and a lot of them are also very much aware, about
Mm-hmm.
climate changes. And then like my son, is 15. And, like the conversations that I have with him, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was like a total dummy at your age. So again, it gives me a lot of hope, because when you travel, and um I find it, perhaps it's us old heads who kind of see things a certain way, and then when you start speaking to someone that's a lot younger, they know what they want, but they also know what they don't want to let go of, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's powerful.
Yeah, there's one of the most inspiring things. Like, I love documentaries. I love seeing people talking about what's happening in the world. And there's a documentary called Cuba Skate. And it was a bunch
Mm,
of skateboarders going into Cuba. And because you can't import so many things, they're getting really creative of how to reclaim some abandoned spaces to make an indoor skate park, and supporting each other. And
that's
it's
a documentary.
yeah, it's so great. I'll send you the link and I'll make sure it's in
Oh,
our show
please
notes
do.
too. But it was just so compelling to see, again, young people wanting progress but still
Hmm.
wanting to honor where they were.
The
And
heritage, yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a new perspective. Like, there's we don't need like everything to be same, same, same. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
so many ways to make commerce wherever you are with,
Hmm.
the skills and
And that
greatness and
ties into
wisdom.
this whole sustainability too,
Mhm. Yes.
because I think one of the reasons why it took me a while to even refer to myself as a designer was really saying to myself, well, if I didn't make one dress, no one would go naked, you know,
Hmm.
no
Yeah.
one would go naked. And I think when you're in this industry, if you truly care, it
Hmm.
pushes you to really care. Like if you care, it's kind of like it could only build, it could only grow.
Hmm.
Um, but the truth of the matter is, when you're also seeing, as you said, they don't necessarily have access to the new, and they're just kind of
Yep.
like revamping what's already there.
Hmm.
I think that's a necessity approach, to every industry, to every industry. I was having a conversation with my friend um, in regards to this whole trade war. And I think, we kind of like went back and forth, back and forth. And one of the last things that I said to him, I said, well, if the whole world, like we had this reset with the coronavirus, and I think that really pushed everyone to realize, like, I need to slow down. I don't
Hmm.
need this many this. I don't need this many that. And I said, well, if this trade war within 5 year span is really also going to push us to question and to realize what is really a priority for us to absolutely have and what is not, then I think it's a benefit to planet Earth. It's a benefit to
Hmm.
nature. It's scary, because we're kind of like feel or think that we need to have this sort of like capitalist way of
Hmm.
being in this world, and it's kind of like money that makes the world go around. But perhaps if we need to trim it down similarly to what we did during the pandemic, I don't think it's such a bad thing.
No, I agree. Like, I think how it's being done is just really silly, for
Mm, yeah.
lack of
Well, we
all the other
we can say
expletives.
so much about that.
Yeah. So I think it's done in a way that's very just ridiculous. But I
Yeah.
agree with you. And we're already seeing the consumer behavior in the US change.
Hmm.
And we're, it just like the pandemic, it's forcing, you know, I was proud during the pandemic. People who came to me, clients I already had, everyone survived. And I
Mm-hmm.
kept telling them, I'm like, it's terrifying what's happening with when we were in COVID, and it's terrifying what's happening now. But both scenarios are forcing us to look at, are we in
Mm-hmm.
alignment with our values? Is our
Mm-hmm.
business physically fit? Is it doing things for the right reasons? Like all the fat's getting trimmed out of things
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's either not the resources, there's not the mental capacity. Like
Yeah, it's a
there's a,
lot.
oh, it's so much. And, you know, what I love so much about this powerful ladies community is it gives me relief that there are women in every corner of the world doing the good things, doing the good
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I remember when I left the fashion world too, I was like, there was that kind of crisis about, again, why are we making more things? But then I look at a brand like yours that's a higher price point. It's such higher quality than what other people are doing. There's almost a responsibility that, again, from the outside in, that is so visible to me of you're making things that you hope people are keeping forever, if not passing on to somebody
Mm-hmm.
else. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to make things, let's make them so that they fall into that heirloom space
Mm-hmm.
versus something that you only care about for a month.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's
Exactly.
because, like, we've had a couple of interesting conversations. We do a powerful conversation series where we'll pick a topic and have a panel. And we have another one coming up I think you'd be great for. So we'll reach out about that. But we've had some about
Looking forward to
fashion.
it. Mm-hmm.
Great. How we can balance this desire to be self-expressed and to be creative and at the same time have this conscious about what's happening to our planet and how we're contributing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are brands like yours that have found that spot. You're not making things endlessly. You're putting the
Mm-hmm.
quality into it.
Mm-hmm.
You're being thoughtful about all the steps. And so thank you for making beautiful garments that
Thank
have
you.
intention behind them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think,
Mhm.
it's very, it's sort of it's almost like a tongue twister to try to
Mhm.
explain, and particularly when we're doing collaboration. We've done collaborations with other brands whose approach is
Mhm.
very different from ours. And to me, what seems very simple, it seems so complicated to them because
Mhm.
they just don't understand like how you just customizing everything, because to them even
Yeah.
making a dress shorter or longer seems like it's such a huge task. um
It
but
ruins the whole line.
yeah, it's like it's very
Mhm.
sort of simple, and that's because I don't try to have everything done and
Mhm.
sell it afterwards. So I really do love the flexibility of how I create, of how I produce rather, um, because it really allows me to continue to imagine, because I could have
Mhm.
a roll of white fabric that I am inspired to make a gorgeous dress with, that I think every woman would see and would appreciate and would love and want to get. But in reality, very few women reacted to it. But the fact that I only made one dress that is presented and then people kind of like react to it in accordance,
Mhm.
then I don't have the stress of trying to, sell 1,000 of it if I had produced 1,000 of it. So now my
Mhm.
fabric is still pretty much raw, and I can go back to my creative sense to think of something
Mhm.
else to make with that very same fabric. So, and in that process, if I have something with a particular flower on it, but somebody would prefer another flower from my collection, or even
Mhm.
a completely like their own favorite flower, then it gives me the flexibility to do it.
Mhm.
And it's the same approach if somebody's buying something singular. It's the same approach if my wholesalers is buying something from me, in their order size.
Mhm.
Um, so it's kind of like it's a win-win. It's
Yeah.
really a win-win. And when you're talking about sustainability, um, I have I don't know if you know Shalom Morog. when the pandemic was happening, I was really like in a fog, really questioning, like, do I really need to keep going with this? Do I really need
Mhm.
to do this? Because like I said, I felt like if I didn't make a singular dress, nobody would make it.
Mhm.
And similar to what you've said, she said to me, like, you're doing something very different. So you cannot dare compare yourself to anyone who's mass producing something. Um, and her saying that to me really pushed me to remember how the whole culture of clothing that I grew up around, which was,
Mhm.
my aunt's getting fabrics, bringing it to a tailor, and the tailor would squeeze to make the majority of what could be made out of that fabric. A skirt, a dress, a blouse, like
Mhm.
a short, whatever could be made into that fabric, it would be made. And I also remembered I didn't see my aunts just having these things and kind of like going crazy, loving them in that instance. And then within a couple of weeks, she was over them. So the same joy that she had having these fabrics made, and a lot of times frustrations because tailors would tell you, I'll give this to you in a week, and then it's like, hey, a week went into like 5 months and I didn't get my stuff yet. So the
Mhm.
joy of finally having these garments really stayed with her or with them every time they're going to reach into their closet or, you know, going into their cupboards to get these pieces to wear. So that having that conversation during the pandemic really kind of served as a reminder, not just like what I remembered as a child, but to go back to that heirloom piece that you mentioned. This is really one of the reasons why I really am thoughtful in the way that I make clothing. Because if I'm making a dress for you to wear now, and then, 20 years from now, you have a young adult daughter, or,
Mhm.
like even 15 years from now, you have a teenage daughter. I want her to stumble upon this in your closet and to be just as excited about finding that dress to wear it.
Mhm.
And I think, there's like a certain energy or a female presence that I'm really conscious of when I make present in my garment. I want that to remain. And I don't want it to be something that someone feels like it's just could be disposed because they got over it or it's not trendy. So that timeless um, presence in my garment, I really want it to remain, precedent for the mom and also the daughter or even daughter-in-law if she doesn't. In my case, I would like to be close enough to my daughter-in-law so she could kind of like get all my
Mhm.
pretty dresses because I have two boys.
Yeah. Well, as we're wrapping up today, I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Mhm.
The first is when you think of the words powerful and ladies, what do they mean to you on their own? And do their meanings change when those words are next to each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think power, I think um, women comes to mind, and that's not to say that men don't have their own power, but I think the energy that kinds of wraps around our power is really within our
Mhm.
essence and is very different than the power that a man have. We are we are the nurturers, so we naturally have an innate way to love and to be tough and to structure things that kind of exude its own power. So when I think of power, I think of our feminine essence, of how it could uplift and nurture and heal and really make somebody feel seen. And when you think of ladies, um, I guess, if I'm being in all truthfulness, ladies is it's very different, I guess, from culture to culture. Um, so if I'm thinking of women that I'm used to, like, so be it a Caribbean woman
Mhm.
or an American woman, I feel, like when you put that with power, it really mixed differently. Um, in the sense that a lot of times we have a more outer way of exhibiting that
Mhm.
power, versus, like when I think of some powerful women in Turkey or um, in some other cultures, it's a little bit more, it's kind of like a hidden power. It's not something that's so much in the forefront, but nonetheless, they're extremely powerful. Like
Yeah.
I say this all the time, like Turkish women are badass. Like like they are like the boss in their home. Like of course the men have their presence, but for the most part, they're the ones who kind of like who lead the home in an unspoken way. So, and there's power in that. Like you don't necessarily need to always be boisterous about that
Mhm.
strength. So it's very interesting to see how the dynamic really changes culture to culture. But I think in every sense of the word, are when you put women and you put power together, I think it's a very um, balanced combination. Whereas the men, we could, naturally say lethal combination because, they're the ones who like wars and things like that. We like flowers and plants and
All things to avoid war. Yes.
yeah, exactly.
We ask everyone on the podcast where they put themselves on the powerful lady scale. If 0 is an average everyday human and 10 is the most powerful lady you can imagine, where would you place yourself today and on an average day?
Well, I guess, yeah, it depends on the day. Today, I could definitely say a 10, because I feel very much asserted in my being as a
Mhm.
woman, as a human being, in my direction for what I have accomplished professionally, for being teenage moms. So I definitely see how I have kind of like, become this butterfly out of my cocoon. I'm
Mhm.
definitely not um the same as I was, like in my 20s or even 30s. I think now at 44 years old, and seeing myself truly as myself and everything that I was able to accomplish, so be it personally or professionally, I definitely stand 10 toes down in my power.
Mhm. I love that. That's a good version, like a good visual for that power.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
is there a ritual or daily practice that you can't live without or that allows you to be most in your power?
Well, I think I wake up, the first thought that comes to mind is thank you. Like that's
Mhm.
the word that kind of like wakes me out of my sleep. And then a sense of gratitude throughout my day. I think this is really the true way
Mhm.
um that kind of like sets the tone for me for my day, to wake up in thankfulness and to continue throughout my day in this immense sense of gratitude. That's what makes me feel really grounded. And that's what really um, makes my perspective somewhat clear, and keep me very solution driven. Being in this field of work, it gets very chaotic, very crazy, very hectic, and a lot of people look on to me daily for the answer. So I think, um, being grateful definitely keeps me humbled. It keeps me balanced, and that's sort of like my thing.
This is a, you know, big and powerful community, and I haven't met a powerful lady yet who doesn't want to pay it forward or help somebody else. So, what is something on your to do list, your wish list, your manifest list that we could help you with?
Well, I do have a couple of places in Haiti that I
Mhm.
support. Um, And I think, when it comes to paying it forward, perhaps, it's those places. And
Sure.
I've mentioned them quite a lot because they're kind of like at the top of what keeps me somewhat connected in Haiti in different
Mm-hmm.
aspects. So there is Grown in Haiti. That's a young man who was a pretty well-known, like a renowned photographer in New York who decided to move back to Haiti. And his mom was also like, well, not was, she still is a very dynamic woman, who's also like a lover of nature. So he went back to Haiti and started Grown in Haiti. And he's been really nurturing and growing that in a very educational way to the youth. So I'm very much inspired by that, the work that he has done, and now his mom has fully joined him in doing. And another one is called PSA, it's Project Saint Anne. They're also another organization that deals with giving out supplies when schools are opening and really helping to kind of like support and feed the nation throughout,
Mm-hmm.
different sort of programs. And there's another place. I the name is it's mixed, but I could maybe send it to you
Yeah,
separately. They focus on providing labor care for women who are in the rural parts of Haiti. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's Grace Birth Center, but I have to confirm
sure.
um,
Yeah,
on
send us an
IG, and
email.
I could send it to you. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, or DM us. We'll include it in the show notes. Hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's those are incredible. And then for everybody who wants to see your beautiful dresses, work with you, support you, just reach out and send you well wishes. Where can they find, follow, and support you?
Well, we are on Instagram and as well as Facebook at
Mhm.
Fanm Mon. It's FANMMON on Instagram as well as Facebook. And I think the team got something on TikTok, but I'm not sure. I have to confirm with the social team because I did open an account, but for whatever reason, um, my I forgot my iPad's password, and like I got locked out of that TikTok, so we had to do another one. So I think it may be someone with some other like numbers
Mhm.
or something like that. And then we have our website, which is www.fanmon.com. It's FANMMON.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending your late Friday evening with me. And, just thank you. Thank you for being a yes to me, to Powerful Ladies, for everything that you're doing, and just doing the good work, whether
Yeah.
it from social work to taking those same values into fashion. Just thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope your audience will enjoy this little chat.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend. Head to thepowerfulladies.com where you can find all the links to connect with Sophia, see everything to buy Fanm Mon, as well as learn more about Powerful Ladies. Come hang out with us on Instagram at Powerful Ladies, and you can find me and all my socials at karaduffy.com. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I hope you're taking on being powerful in your life. Go be awesome and up to something you love.